Hi, I'm Rob, N1NUG. I overheard a conversation on HF here a little while ago that I thought would be an interesting topic to discuss with you over a video and kind of get your thoughts on it. Basically, the premise of the conversation was this. Should hams use the 2-meter Simplex FM calling frequency for general conversation, or should they make a call and move off right away? There were a few different viewpoints kind of discussed in this conversation, and I kind of see almost all sides of the argument, so I'm not sure where I land on this. And that's why I thought it would be good to kind of discuss it here in this forum and see what you think. One side of the argument goes something like this. The 2-meter calling frequency is a calling frequency, and what that means is that you are supposed to make a call, and once you establish contact with another station, you should move to another frequency and leave 146.52 free for somebody to make another call. And that makes sense for a few reasons. The first being that it keeps 146.52 open for others that may want to make calls, especially if the band is open for some reason. Maybe we've got some tropospheric ducting or something along those lines, and there's some kind of DX coming in from other areas, and stations want to come in, make a contact, and then move off to another frequency to continue that conversation. Now, along those same lines, people will monitor 146.52 to listen for openings. And when they start to hear activity on 146.52, they listen to the call signs, and if those call signs are unfamiliar or are from out of the area, they know that the band is open, and then they can go to another frequency and start calling CQ, and hopefully somebody will hear them. A lot of people also consider 146.52 what I'll call an emergency frequency, especially for travelers. Meaning if people are generally going to be monitoring that frequency, if somebody is having car trouble or gets in an accident or needs help, they can get on 146.52 and call for help, and people will respond. If I've got 146.52 in my radio on scan and I don't normally hear anything, when the radio does stop on that frequency and I do hear activity, it kind of gets my attention. And if somebody needs help, that's probably a good thing. Whereas a lot of the repeaters, there might be local chatter, that kind of a thing. And if the radio stops, sometimes I just turn the volume down and don't listen. So it would be a good thing to have a frequency that's normally open, and that when you hear something on there, that means you better pay attention because somebody's going to need some help. And another kind of side argument to that is if people are constantly using the frequency and somebody does need help, it might be hard for them to break into a conversation if there's one ongoing. So again, that's another argument for keeping that frequency open and only using it to make contacts or when there's an emergency. The other side of the argument goes something like this. If hams don't use 146.52 on a sort of regular basis, people won't think that that frequency is active. Nobody will use it. Nobody will put it in their scan. Nobody will listen to it. Therefore, if there is some kind of an emergency or something happens, nobody will be there to kind of pick up that emergency traffic. Therefore, we should use it so that people know that it's a place that they can go and find other hams that are monitoring. So along these lines, here in sort of northeast, north central Connecticut, I really don't hear a lot of activity on 146.52. I'll hear an occasional SOTA activation, or I'll hear an occasional traveler coming through on the interstate between New York and Boston. That'll be just happen to be calling CQ while in range of my station. When I do hear somebody, I do go back to them to let them know that, hey, there's activity out there. And generally, I will have a conversation with them for at least a little while. The thing about 146.52 is it's great for people that are out of the area and don't know what the local repeaters are and just don't have the time or bandwidth to kind of look that up ahead of time. So in other words, it gives them somebody to talk to, and they at least know that somebody's here. Now, along those same lines, I'll also occasionally hear aeronautical mobiles. There's at least one station that I don't want to say on a regular basis, but at least a couple times a year gets on the air and starts making calls on 14652 while he's traveling through the area. And when I hear him, I like to go back to him. I think it's pretty cool to work an aeronautical mobile, especially since a lot of times the aeronautical mobile will be quite a distance away. Even though the contacts with the plane are relatively quick between individual stations, maybe 2, 3, maybe 4 overs at most, while the plane is sort of in the area, it's usually working many stations all over the place. So you could argue that the frequency is sort of tied up in the area while that plane is traveling overhead. All that activity on 2 meters in the area could cover up a potential emergency contact if someone were out there and people were busy and distracted by working the aeronautical mobile instead of listening for emergency traffic. Now that I've hashed out sort of both sides of the argument, what do you think? Should 14652 be used strictly as for a calling frequency and emergency use? Or should it be used as a general ham frequency? Now, my personal opinion is sort of biased by the environment in which I live. I think it's okay to do a SOTA activation or even a POTA activation on 14652, for 30 minutes or an hour or whatever it might be. And I think it's really cool that the aeronautical mobiles use 14652 while they're flying through the area for 30, 45 minutes, an hour or so, and take contacts all along the route as they travel through the area. I also think it's okay to use 14652 for, occasional conversation. Not necessarily rag chew, but, if I've got a friend that I need to contact, we don't want to tie up the repeater, or maybe the repeater's already in use, and we're in close enough range to work Simplex, I think we can have a 5 or maybe even 10-minute conversation on 14652 and then clear off the frequency and leave it open for somebody else to use for the same purpose. If you are going to use 14652 for general communications, one of the things you should probably do is leave a gap in between your transmissions. That way, if there is an emergency, somebody can break in and relay that message and get help. Or even if somebody just wants to make a call to another station, they have an opportunity to do that. It's also good practice to recognize when there might be a band opening, tropospheric ducting, something like that, where all of a sudden you get sort of DX stations starting to come in. If you're using the frequency for general chit-chat at that point, it's best to wrap up those conversations and leave the frequency clear so people can make those DX contacts while the band is open. And then once the opening is over and everything goes back to normal, then I would say you could probably resume normal operations, general chit-chat, POTA, SOTA, whatever. But I think that all depends on the area that you're in. Even here in New England, the approach may be different from region to region. I was in northern New Hampshire a few days ago for the Great Eclipse. And while I was there, I put 14652 on to see if there was any activity. Now, there were a lot of travelers coming through the area from southern New England and points south to travel up to northern New Hampshire, where the eclipse was going to be kind of total. So there was a lot more traffic on the road and 14652 than would be normal for, that area of New Hampshire. I heard some of the locals making contacts with the people traveling through, myself included. And I think they were happy to make the contacts. It was conveyed by the locals that, hey, we're tying up this frequency. Maybe we should think about moving or keeping the conversation spaced out, something like that. And that's just one or two examples. I know that hams in other parts of the country treat and use 14652 differently. And that's what led me to make this video. I'm curious to know how you use 14652 in your area. Do you use it simply for a calling frequency, keep it clear for emergencies, or do you rag chew on it? I'd also like to know, especially if your region does use 14652 strictly for calling and strictly for emergencies, what do you do if somebody from out of the area comes in and decides to do a SOTA activation or a POTA activation? Or have a rag chew on 14652? Do you break in and let them know that that's not how you want the frequency to be used in your area? And if you do, how do you approach it? Do you kind of scold them as if they should probably already know that? Or do you just kind of gently say, hey, would you mind taking this to another frequency? We don't use 14652 for these activities here. I'd really like to get a good conversation going and see what the consensus is out there. So let me know what you think down below. 7-3, and thanks for watching.